Now let's move on to looking at dividing a decimal by a power of 10. Remember when we multiplied a decimal by a power of 10, we had a shortcut where we could move the decimal place over to the right, the number of zeros. The shortcut is basically the same thing with division, except that you're moving the decimal to the left the same number of places. So for example, if we have 52 and 6/10, and we're dividing by 10, we're dividing that 52.6 into 10 groups, which means each group is going to have a smaller number in it. So we're looking for a smaller answer. That's why we end up moving our decimal place to the left. There was 1 0 in 10, so we moved one decimal place over to the left to end up with 5.26 or 5 26 Okay, next one. So again, we're going to move to the left this time. This time we're going 2 decimal places because there were 2 zeros in our number 100. And we end up with 2 679 thousandths. All right, next one. So we're moving our decimal place to the left 1. So it's going to end up here, and that's okay because we can just add a 0 in front. It's 0.384 or 384 thousandths. Okay, last one, I'm just going to write it out here. So we've got 27.3 or 27 3/10, I should say. We're moving 3 over to the left. We're going to have to add a 0 to do that. So our new decimal place is going to end up here. So we end up with 0.0273, which would be 273 10,000ths. All right. Now you could do those using the long division we learned in the last section. It will also work. This is just a faster way. So we have a shipment of 1,000 notebooks that cost the stationery store 658. And we want to know the cost per item, cost per notebook. So we have 658. Remember, our decimal on a whole number would be at the end, so it's right here. We're dividing that by 1,000. So our decimal place is going to go then 3 over to the left. And so we end up with 0.658. So our answer then, it's in dollars because our original question was in dollars. So our answer in dollars is 658 thousandths. Generally with money, we would round up to the nearest hundredth. So that would be 66 hundredths. Okay, and if you're paying cash, you would actually round to the nearest 5, but let's not worry about that right now. So we end up with 66 hundredths, or if you want, you could say that's the same thing as 66 cents. So the cost per notebook is, oh, and they said to the nearest cent. Well, actually, both of these answers are to the nearest cent, but I'll write it in cents. So it's 66 cents. Okay, last part, let's take a look at doing some BEDMAs, just like we did in chapter 1, but now we've got decimals. So here, the first thing we're going to do is to deal with what's in brackets. So I'm just going to write in the margins here. So I've got 8 5/10. We're multiplying by 2/10. Okay, so I multiply out that 2, and then I've got 2 decimal places, so it's going to be right here in my answer. My answer is going to have 2 decimal places because this one had 1, this number had 1, so my answer is going to have 2. So now let's funnel that down. So this is the same as 6 35 hundredths plus 1 70 hundredths squared minus 3.7. Okay, now, so we've dealt with our B, our brackets. Next thing we need to deal with is our exponent. So we've got 1.7 squared, which is the same thing as 1.7. You can add 0 if you want, but you don't need to, multiplied by itself. So let's do the math on that one. and we get 289. We have to think about decimal places though. I've got to add 2 decimal places there. So I get 2 and 89 hundredths once I've dealt with that decimal. Okay, now we've dealt with our exponents. There's no multiplication and division, so our next step is to do addition and subtraction left to right. So that means I'm going to start with 6 and 35 hundredths minus 2 and 89 hundredths. And what do we get here? $3.46. So now these funnel to 3.46. And then we have to subtract 3.7. That sounds like, what am I doing wrong here? Oh, I just subtracted instead of added. Okay, let's back up. Let's do that again. So we want to add those two, not subtract them. Sorry about that. Six and 35 hundredths plus 2 and 89 hundredths. I just got so excited to subtract. Okay, so now I've got 9 and 24 hundredths. So that's going to funnel down here. Because we shouldn't have any negative answers until about chapter 10. Okay, so now we can do a subtraction. Now I finally get to do my subtraction. So remember, subtraction, we're going to line up those decimal places just like we do with addition. And what do we get here? Oops. 4. Let's borrow to get 5 there. And 5. So I end up with 5 and 54 hundredths. Okay. Pause the video and try that next one. All right, let's do the next one together now. So first thing we want to do is deal with those brackets. So we've got 3 and 57 hundredths, and we're subtracting 2 and 14 hundredths. And that leaves us with what? 1 and 43 hundredths. So let's write that in. So this becomes 1.43. Okay, next step is to deal with that exponent. So 2.5 squared means 2.5 multiplied by itself. So let's do that multiplication. And so I get 6 and 25 hundredths. Okay, what next? So now we want to deal with that multiplication. So 3 and 2/10 multiplied by 1 and 5/10. And I get 4 and 80 hundredths, or we could actually just say 4 and 8/10, because those mean the same thing. Let's leave it in hundredths, I guess. Just because it'll make the addition easier. Okay, now, so that was because we did those. So now we can deal with subtraction and addition left to right. So we're going to start with that subtraction. So we've got 6 and 25 hundredths minus 1 and 43 hundredths. And so I get 4 and 82 hundredths. It is important to do these left to right. Sometimes that will make a difference. Sometimes it won't, but good practice. And so when I do that final addition, what do I get? So I get 9 and 62 hundredths.